not the biggest expert. I'm still not the biggest expert on, sharing my screen and all that stuff, but I am going to attempt to share. Nope, that's not it. See, isn't that weird? That's not the document I wanted to share with you. Okay. Hang on. Now, let me try to make this full screen. I don't know how to do that. All right, once again, it's not ideal, but can you see this letter? Okay, so today we're going to talk about the letter pay. And by the way, I calculated how many classes we have left before the summer break. And I have to put 2 together, but not today because today's letter's complicated because it has 3 forms. But I'll put 2 together so that we will at least finish the alphabet before we break for the summer, to give you a chance to look at the documents and practice. And then if you want, when we start again, God willing, in September, I can teach you the handwritten forms of the letters if that's of interest to you. Okay, so today's letter is the letter Pei, which is the 17th of 22 letters, and its numerical value is 80. Now, we have seen a letter before, the letter Chaf, that has 3 forms, without a dagesh, with a dagesh, and a final form. So let's go through it, okay? So this form here, this one that you're looking at in these 3 different fonts, without a dot in the middle, is actually called Fei, and it's the F sound in Hebrew. If it has a dot in the middle, it is called Pei, although the letter itself we call Pei, but it's pronounced with a P sound. The way that I was taught and the way that I teach this letter is that this, to distinguish between, to know how to pronounce it, is that this is like a point, a P, a pay, it all connects, okay? This form of the letter does not appear in modern Hebrew. It's not on a keyboard, which is why these letters look so weird, because I had to cut and paste them. You will find it in a Siddur, in a Jewish prayer book. You will find it in a Tanakh if it has vowels, but you won't find it like in a Hebrew newspaper or in a menu or a note from the teacher or something like that. Okay, so this form with the dot, that dot in Hebrew is called a dagesh, is called a pei, and it makes a P sound. And then there are 5 letters in Hebrew that we write slightly differently if they are the last letter of a word. And that is not something that exists in English. But there is a 3rd form. So we have Fei without the dot in the middle, Pei with the dot in the middle. And this final form is called Pei Sofit. Sofit means final, okay? And we have already looked at 3 of the 5 letters, and now this is the 4th of the 5, the final Chaf, the final Mem, and the final Nun. We've seen those before, and this is what a Pei Sofit looks like. So it's got the same beginning, but instead of curving around, it drops down, okay? Now, I told you that the gematria of this letter, the numerical value of this letter, is 80, and there's a teaching that Moses, when he was 80 years old, that was his big year of leading the Israelites out of Egypt and also transmitting the Torah to them. The word pei literally means mouth. And there's a teaching here that a mouth we use to speak with is a very powerful tool. It's something that we can use to make our communication with individuals healthy or not healthy. We can use it to raise people up. We can use it to build relationships in a good way. And we can use it to destroy relationships and destroy people's reputations in the form of Lashon Hara, which we have spoken about. Lashon Hara literally means evil tongue. So it doesn't have the word pay in it, but you could call it like a bad mouth, an evil mouth. Okay. And then there's this idea that, just to connect the 2 ideas, that Moshe had a speech impediment. I believe this is well known. I'm wondering now if it's a Jewish source or if it's something that's commonly known outside of there. But even despite his speech impediment, he had a tremendous impact, obviously, on millions of people for the next 40 years of his life. And the teaching idea is that all of us have impediments. There are all things that we have strengths about and things that we have weaknesses about, but those weaknesses should never be something that keeps us from doing good, from inspiring others, from sharing what we know. And there's a Jewish teaching that I put in here that a person who knows Aleph should teach Aleph. So you may think about yourself, or I may think about myself, I'm not qualified to teach somebody else because I don't know all there is to know. But if you know a little something and it is the truth, then it's something that you should share with other people, because there's always people who know less than you. Okay. And then here I gave you 3 words that start with this letter. So I told you that pei, hey, means a mouth, like literally. And a parsha, that's another word I think you know, is a Torah portion. And this word para means cow. And right now, there's a lot of talk about the para aduma, the red heifer or the red cows, that there's a group of them in Shiloh, who we've never talked together about this mitzvah, but I don't know if you know about this, but it's a big deal because we require the ashes of a red heifer in order to purify people for service in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. And so there you have a little bit of pay. Now I'm seeing yes, so Andrea asks, because Moshe had this this speech impediment, that God asked Aaron to accompany him so that he could be his mouthpiece. So God didn't leave him hanging, but he did give him some support. Okay. Now, any questions about that before I go on? I will, as always, send you the document. But today, I'm taking a chance. I take risks with you guys. And I want to talk about something that is called in Hebrew, you probably have never heard of this, I wouldn't expect you to. It's the Yud Gimel Ikarim. We have learned the letter Yud and Gimel, and you may remember that the numerical value of Yud is 10, and the numerical value of Gimel is 3. And together, 10 plus 3 is 13, okay? So this is and Ikarim are principles. So this is a very famous list of things that Jews believe. It's called, in English, it's called the 13 Principles of Faith. In Hebrew, it's called the Yud Gimel Yikarim. And it is, as Torah goes, it is a relatively recent, it comes from the 12th century, so it's not so recent for us, but it is relatively recent in that it is post-biblical. From the beginning, in a Torah lifestyle, faith and practice went together. But over time, different religions in the world, and especially Christianity, identified what they believed in. What are the doctrines of this religion? And they articulated that into the world, and that began to influence Jews at the time. And so the rabbis in the Middle Ages decided, we probably need to articulate what are the central principles of Torah Judaism. And that's where this comes from. The 13 principles of faith that I'm going to introduce you to are based on the work of Maimonides, who you may have heard of as the Rambam, who lived in the 12th century. So that's about 850 years ago. And the 13 principles fall basically into 3 categories. What do we believe about God? What do we believe about the validity of the revelation of Torah? And what do we believe about God's relationship with the world, highlighting reward and punishment? Okay, that is like a sub-theme. Some of these are going to be comfortable for you. You know, they're gonna rest comfortably, that you're going to say, oh yeah, that is consistent with how I see the world. And some of them maybe not so much, but I'd like to expose you to these ideas. Historically, as I said, Jews never separated belief from performance. So the mitzvah to believe in God isn't stated any differently than, for example, the mitzvah to avoid eating chametz or leavened products on Pesach. But as other religions, especially Christianity, began to espouse specific dogma, Jews started doing that. Okay. And these principles are important, and they are surely at the core of Jewish belief. But I should say that in its day, many people were uncomfortable with the idea of establishing a formal creed of Torah, of Judaism. And today, even though almost universally Orthodox Jews accept this litany of what I'm going to share with you, in practice, nobody's ever asked to affirm belief in these principles. It's not like, you go in front of a court and you say, do you promise to believe in these things? But because in Judaism, belief is personal and private, and it's actions that are critical. So we have an expression, which you may have heard, that in Judaism, what counts is deed and not creed. Okay, which is it's a very different conceptual model. It's a very different paradigm than the way that I understand, in my limited understanding of what Christianity teaches, which is it's more about what you believe and what you accept. Okay, so that's already a paradigm shift. But nevertheless, we do have principles, and they're summarized in a listing known as Ani Ma'amin, which is it means I believe, but it's grammatically masculine. So a woman would say Ani Ma'amina, I believe. There's also a prayer called Yigdal that was written a couple centuries later, like 14th, 15th century. That's part of the daily morning service that summarizes these ideas. And it's also sometimes, it's a song, it's usually sung as part of the Friday evening service. I will send you a bunch of links where you can look at these, but I want to go through them one by one. Okay. So the first five are in the category of belief in God. So here's in translation: I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is the creator and guide of all the created beings, and that he alone has made, does make, and will make all things. Those last, made, does make, and will make all things, is a very important principle because it's past, present, and future. Okay. So here's a little commentary on this. There is no partnership in creation. God is the only one. God is the single sole creator, and the universe continues to exist only because he wills it to be so. God could continue to exist even if everything else came to an end, but it's impossible to imagine that there could be any form of existence independent from God. So there's an idea, a Jewish idea, that God recreates reality in constantly, like every second. And if he were to, however you understand this, withdraw his attention from the world, the whole thing would collapse. In other words, that God somehow is putting out spiritual energy on a perpetual basis so that the world looks the way it does, so that this book continues to be something solid that I could hold on to and I could pick up and I could show you and I could read. But if God were to turn his attention, so to speak, away from the physical world that we experience, it would all disappear. But there's no way to conceptually understand, based on this first of the principles, a world without God. You follow how fundamental this is, okay? There's nothing that can exist separate from God, independent of God, and there's nothing, there's no possibility of there being a reality that does not include God. That's the first principle. The second principle: I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is one and alone, that there is no oneness in any way like him, and that he alone is our God, was, is, and will be. So there's, again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Was, is, and will be, past, present, and future. But what this is speaking to, among other things, is that God doesn't have a body the way that humans and animals do. He can't be split into parts the way everything else in the created world can. So, and I'm not much of a scientist, but I am aware of this concept of atomic particles and subatomic particles, that everything that we see in the physical world, a tissue, a piece of an ear of corn, a book, a car, your grandchild, whatever it is, can be divided into smaller parts, but God cannot. The absolute oneness of God is so foundational that that is what is expressed in the first words of Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So I'm just going to stop here and tell you this story. When I was first becoming interested in Judaism, I was affiliated with a Reform congregation, which is a liberal congregation. And I went to the rabbi and he gave me some things to read. And there was in these books this constant repetition of this idea that God is one, God is one, God is one. And I didn't, coming from like a secular brain, I didn't understand why there was so much emphasis on that. But now I understand better that this concept of the oneness of God is foundational to everything else that Torah is based on. Okay, the third principle, we're still in the third of the first 5 of the 13 that relate to belief in God. I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is incorporeal. He is free from all anthropomorphic properties and he has no likeness at all. God is not physical, which is very hard for us to understand because we live in a deeply physical world. His essence cannot even be grasped by the human imagination because we're physical and therefore we're limited. So a good analogy for this is if you tried to explain, let's say, how a mortgage works to a 4-year-old, they cannot grasp this. Most 4-year-olds, okay? It is information that they do not have the vessels to contain or to process. So I'm just using that as an example of the fact that we are finite people with limited brains, and even if we have an IQ of 250 IQ points or whatever, God exists in a realm that is outside of our ability to grasp it. We actually can't conceive, we can speak about it, but we can't really conceive of a being that is totally unaffected by the laws of nature and physics that exists outside the material world in which we live. And yet, the Torah speaks of God as having hands, as having eyes, as having a mouth, or other human qualities, only to help us understand certain ideas. God doesn't have hands or mouths or any physical parts. And so that's all just like using human language. The way that you might explain a complicated idea to a younger child, you oversimplify it. That doesn't mean that your explanation is the essence of the idea. Okay. The next principle, I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is the first and the last. Everything in the created universe has a specific time when it was first created. So there's nothing in the universe that's infinite except for God. God is infinite in the sense that he transcends time because the very concept of time is something that he created. So in the previous principles that talk about past, present, and future, we experience past, present, and future. We experience time as linear. You know, we remember yesterday, we think about tomorrow, we're sitting here today. But for God, he's, however you understand this, and because I'm using words to try to explain concepts they're really hard to grasp in human language, but God kind of sits outside of time. So it leads to what I have often thought about when people ask about, it's a very classic theological question about how can we have free will if God already knows what's going to happen, right? If God already knows the outcome of a situation, and that is a fundamental Jewish idea that God's already there. He's already at the end. He's at the end of time. He's at the end of whatever trouble you're going through right now. He's at the end of whatever challenges you have right now, and he already knows, God already knows how it's all going to play out. Hi, Lori, welcome. And so God transcends, I'll just say it again because I think this is so powerful. God transcends time because the very concept of time is something that he created. Okay. The fifth of the fifth of the five fundamental principles about belief in God, according to the Torah, is this: I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is the only one to whom it is proper to pray, and it is inappropriate to pray to anyone else. Prayers are directed to God alone. And so I don't want to name names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but somebody had a conversation with me this week about this idea of, because we just had the holiday of Lag BaOmer, where the tradition is a lot of Jews go to Meron, which is in the north, where there is a grave of, we call him the Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote the Zohar, which is a fundamental text of Kabbalah. And to somebody outside of Jewish tradition, that can look very weird. Like, why are we all gathering, like tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people gathering at the graveside of some rabbi? And are we worshiping him? And so I want to be clear that it is true that it is common Jewish practice to go to the graves of holy people. Sometime, and in Israel, we go to the graves of biblical personalities. So right down the road from me is the what is known in Hebrew as Kever Rachel, which is the tomb of Rachel. And anytime I want, I get in my car, and 20 minutes later, I can go and pray at the tomb of Rachel. I'm speaking of Rachel, like, the wife of Jacob, the foremother. And the site is a place where people come and pray. We are not praying to Rachel. We are aligning our prayer to God, because that's the only direction, that's the only address for prayer. Because as we said before, everything else is a creation of, and therefore subservient to God. Nothing has any power outside of God. So it's both pointless and also heretical to pray to anything or anyone except God. Okay, so I'm not praying. If I go to Kever Rachel, I am not praying to Rachel. I am praying, I am maybe wanting to attach my prayers to God to the merit, the eternal merit that she has. And the same thing is true when we go to the graves of rabbis. Okay, many of them are buried in Israel, and it's a very common thing for Torah Jews to come to Israel and do like a tour of the graves of holy rabbis that are now dead, hence they have graves, and to pray at their graveside. Okay, but I just want to be clear, we're praying to God at those sites because those sites have some holiness. So those are the 5 of the 13 fundamental principles of faith. Those are the 5 that have to do with belief in God. You with me? Now I'm going to talk about, I think it's 3 of them, that have to do with the validity of the revelation of Torah. Okay? So number 6, or the first in this subgroup, is I believe with complete faith that all the words of the prophets are true. We know that God communicates with humanity. In order for us to know what God expects from us, he spoke to prophets, starting with Abraham. And those words are recorded in Tanakh, in Hebrew scripture. But the era of prophecy ended at the beginning, basically, of the Second Temple period, around 500 BCE, or approximately 2,800 years ago. According to Jewish tradition, prophecy ended when the rabbis prayed for an end to the temptation to worship idols. So today, outside of certain religions with which I am not so familiar, most people aren't tempted to pray to a tree or a stone or an idol. But there was a time when idols were very powerful, and the desire to attach oneself to something in the physical world that served as an idol was so strong, we can't imagine what it was like to be alive in the time of idol worship. But there was a time when those idols didn't only exist, but they had their own priests that were attending to their idol. And using the dark side, the corrupt side of spiritual power, they were even able to accomplish certain miracles. So prophecy existed as a counter to the temptation of idolatry that existed in that time. But God took away what we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination to worship idols. So idol worship is no longer much of a threat or much of a temptation. So in order to keep that balance, God took away prophecy from the world. If you think about what you know about the books of the prophets, a lot of their messages are about staying away from worshiping anything but God, worshiping idols, getting caught up in the whole idea that there's something that has control over destiny that isn't God. Now, there's a much more um, uplifting idea, and that is there's a belief that prophecy will return to the world in the time of Mashiach. Okay. The principle number 7, again, we're in the subcategory of beliefs about the revelation, the validity of the revelation of Torah. This one concerns Moses himself. I believe with complete faith that the prophecy of Moses, our teacher, peace upon him, was true, and that he was the father of the prophets, both those who preceded and of all those who followed him. The prophecy of Moshe was unique. And the reason why it's essential to believe this is that so no one can come along later in history and claim that he or she received a Torah that is, or a teaching from God that is superior to the one that God gave Moses on Mount Sinai. So Moses, we say, is the only prophet that spoke to God face to face. Now, obviously, God doesn't have a face because I just told you that. Got it, but he, however you understand that, most prophets received their prophecy in a state of I, I like semi-consciousness, or that feeling like you're not quite asleep, but you're not fully awake, that sort of edge place where sometimes things occur to you. You have a certain kind of ability to read or to see things or to understand things that, anyway, most prophets, except for Moses, got their transmissions in some kind of liminal state like that, not as the way I'm talking to you, but Moses got his prophecy directly without any interference, without him having to be in any kind of altered state of consciousness. It was just God communicating directly with him. That didn't even happen to Abraham. And so we hold Moshe, as yes. So in visions is the way other prophets got their prophecy, but Moses got it more directly, more clearly, more cleanly, like the pipeline was clear and there was nothing fuzzy about it. And you understand, if we're going to believe in the Torah, if we're going to structure our lives to around what the Torah teaches, we have to believe with absolute certainty that this is not just any teaching, but this is the essential teaching that God means to give to us. So that means that we have to revere Moshe, not like a god. Moshe was a human being with human characteristics. He was a man who lived and died, but he had a level of communication with God that exceeds any other prophet. Okay. Now, a parallel belief is number 8. I believe with complete faith that the whole Torah which we now possess was given to Moshe, our teacher, peace be upon him. So the entire Torah is God-given. Every word in the Torah was dictated by God to Moses, and this applies to the oral Torah and also the written Torah. And we spoke about this did we meet last week or the week before? Last week. This idea that God gave a full transmission to Moshe, and only part of it was given over to the majority of the Israelites at that time. The rest of it was held in reserve. Okay. Principle number 9, I believe with complete faith that this Torah will not be changed and that there will be no other Torah given by the Creator, blessed be his name. The Torah is unchangeable. Since both the written and the oral Torah and the secrets of the Torah, as we talked about last week, were given by God, they cannot be improved on in any way. However, I also told you that when Mashiach comes, we are going to learn parts of the Torah that we don't already know. And that means it's like it's there, but we can't see it. Did you ever have the experience of traveling a certain road, let's say, and you've traveled that road dozens of times, and all of a sudden you notice something that you never noticed before? The truth is it was always there, but you never paid attention to it. So maybe that's a good analogy for the idea that there are things, secrets hidden in the Torah that have not been revealed to us that Mashiach will reveal. That's not the same thing as that the Torah will be replaced by some other document. It'll just be explained in a deeper way. You with me? Okay. So those are the first two sets of principles. We're up to number 10. We have 10, 11, 12, and 13 left. And this set relates to beliefs about God's relationship with the world with a highlight on reward and punishment. Okay. So principle number 10, I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, knows all the deeds and thoughts of human beings, as it is said, and here's a quote from Psalms chapter 33, verse 15. It is he who fashions the hearts of them all, he who perceives all their actions. So we talked before about this idea that because God transcends time, he understands what's going to happen because it's in God's vision, it's already happened, right? Because past, present, and future doesn't exist for the creator and sustainer of the universe. So God created us, and everything we do in this world is known by God. God is aware of everything a person thinks and does, and it's true for us, and it's true for all humanity. There was a funny movie called, I think it was called Oh God. And does anybody remember this? John Denver, I think John Denver, and there was this old guy whose name I can't remember, who played God. Does anybody unmute themselves and remind me what this movie was? No? Oh God. Margaret, do you know what I'm talking about? No? Anyway, the idea was that this old, I'm pretty sure he was Jewish, this old Jewish comedian played God, and he talked about how people keep sending requests in his direct. George Burns, yes, thank you, it was George Burns. I'm pretty sure the movie's called Oh God. It's really maybe a little not heretical, but it's a little, but it's a funny movie. Anyway, it just like what does the world look like from God's perspective? And God is played by this little Jewish guy. Okay. The 11th principle, I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, rewards those who observe his commandments and punishes those who transgress his commandments. So we believe that ultimately no good deed goes unrewarded and no sin goes unpunished. Now, the only way that that could possibly make sense is based on what we talked about last week, if you believe that the soul has other lifetimes, because you can plainly see that sometimes people literally get away with murder in this lifetime, right? But God has a long memory, however you understand that, and many ways to issue reward and punishment. And sometimes reward and punishment, according to the Torah thinking, comes in another lifetime. But sometimes it comes 40 years later, or 10 days later. It isn't always immediate. It isn't like you sin and then God strikes you down. We don't live in a world like that. But God always rewards and punishes ultimately. Now, the idea here of those who observe his commandments or those who transgress his commandments applies to non-Jews as well, because there are expectations. God has expectations of the entirety of the world, and we the Jewish people may have more details, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the world doesn't have any standards to follow. Okay, and we have certain. I think we've spoken about that, but Okay. Number 12 is the most well-known of all the 13, and the Hebrew words of this have been made into a very well-known song. And this is what it says in English. I believe with complete faith in the coming of Mashiach, and even though he may tarry, nevertheless, I wait every day for him to come. I will send you, because I tried once playing a song for you as we were meeting, and you said you couldn't hear it. But the idea is that the Messiah will come whenever God decides is the proper time. And this includes the idea that the Mashiach is a descendant of King David, and to doubt or belittle Mashiach or the eventual coming of Mashiach is to deny the Torah that promises his arrival. So you might come upon a person who would say, oh, we've been waiting 3,300 years for redemption. Like, it's obviously not really a thing, right? That is heresy, according to this. Awaiting Mashiach is being aware that something is missing, that sense that the world lacks something that would make it perfect. And actually, as the world gets more chaotic, this gets easier to see, right? So to anticipate Mashiach, who will resolve all of the problems that we cannot resolve for ourselves, makes more sense once you let go of the fallacy that human strength can solve all problems. Now, I probably do not need to talk to you about why it's good to wait for Mashiach, but that is this principle of faith. You believe that there isn't a redeemer, you believe that he is coming, and you believe that when he comes, the world will transition into something that runs a little smoother than the world that we experience. One of the books that I looked at in preparing is this little book called Fundamentals in Faith, Insights into the Rambam's 13 Principles. It was written by Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, and he had this to say. The essence of this principle, of this idea that no matter how long it takes for Mashiach to show his face, it is a fundamental belief of the Torah that we wait for him, is that he's speaking to Jews, okay? Is that Jews be aware of the purpose of their nation and their existence. In turn, the more one yearns for the Messianic era, the more they commit themselves to the fulfillment of this purpose. Without recognition of this ultimate revelation of God, the Jew would perceive their worship as one-sided or futile. I want to emphasize this next sentence. Torah, which is understood as the covenantal relationship between the Jew and the Almighty, can only be adhered to when man is aware of the reciprocity of that relationship, and Mashiach is that reciprocity. Okay, so what does that mean in simpler terms? The idea of a messianic redeemer makes sense of the rest of the puzzle of faith. The same way that I tried to argue last week, that believing in Gilgulim, believing in reincarnation, believing in the fact that we get a few lifetimes to work things out, makes sense of the puzzle of how come some people who are very good people have a very hard time in life, or people who are evil or who do bad things, how come they appear to prosper? Okay, so without the awareness of this idea that there is a messianic redeemer coming, it could lead people astray. It could lead people into heresy. It could lead people into giving up faith and so forth. So that's 12. And 13, and this one might be the newest one for you. I'm not sure if we've ever talked about this. I believe with complete faith that there will be a resurrection of the dead at the time when it will be the will of the Creator, blessed be his name and exalted be his remembrance forever and ever. The dead will live again in the Messianic era, when the world attains a new spiritual and physical level of perfection, and those who are worthy will live again. This principle could be a really big leap of faith, because we've never seen it, right? We've never seen a person alive in this world who, was dead and buried and then came back to life. But we do have, and yes, I'm not unaware of the Christian overlay of what I'm saying here. but I'm speaking just from a Jewish perspective, that we have a mini version of this every day. Because in Torah thinking, sleep represents 1/60th of death, according to the Talmud. So Hashem returns our souls every time we wake up. So this principle of, it's called in Hebrew Techiyat HaMetim, which means the revival or the resuscitation of the dead, is sort of in a small way it's an expansion of sleep, of the experience of being asleep and then waking up. Okay, and our emunah in this idea can be strengthened because we see this mini resurrection every morning. So we can imagine it'll be much bigger and much more powerful when Mashiach comes. Now it's natural to wonder, what does life look like at the time of the resurrection of the dead? Do people come back physically? How do they look? Will we recognize each other? And there's a couple of different opinions I'll share with you as we're finishing. The Rambam, the same one who formulated these 13 principles, says that after that stage, the body will be different than the bodies that we have now. So the implication will be that the body will be a holy vessel of some kind that will transcend the physical limitations of this world, but it will retain some sense of being. If you think back to the story of Gan Eden, to the story of the Garden of Eden, the original bodies that were given to Adam and Chava, to Adam and Eve, were supposed to last forever, right? Death came into the world as a result of what happened in the Garden of Eden. And so their bodies, the nature of their bodies changed. So the Rambam seems to be saying to us, we will have a different kind of body than the ones we have now. It'll be more holy. There's about 100 years later, there's a sage that we call Nachmanides, or the Ramban, 13th century. He disagrees, and he says that the body will always be subject to physical limitations, because that's what's necessary for the body to have self-awareness, however you understand that. Okay. So there's a debate. In other words, we don't really know. There's different opinions. What is life going to be like after death and after resurrection of all of the worthy people of the world? And thank you for not asking me what that criteria is. I don't know, but I'm assuming that it means that you were, that you loved God and you did your best to live a righteous life. What does it accomplish? So one idea is that it's a reward for the body. We think of spiritual reward, especially like in the next world, in the world to come, whatever language you have, as being directed to the soul, right? That if you live a righteous, and again, I'm speaking Torah doctrine, Jewish doctrine, and this may or may not match up with whatever you were taught, whatever you believe about Christianity, that Christianity has taught you. But generally, spiritual reward is a reward for the soul. This is the idea that the body also gets rewarded. It's also the ultimate rectification, the ultimate tikkun for the whole world, which is going to return. That's sort of part of the whole idea of Geula, is that when we are in that stage, the world returns to what it was like in the Garden of Eden. And the original plan was for the body to be eternal, as I said, because death was introduced as a consequence of eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and Techiyat HaMetim, the revival of the dead, the resuscitation of the dead, whatever you call it, returns the world back to the original plan. Okay, so I'll conclude with this idea, and this again comes from this book, although there's another really great, there's a little booklets. This is Maimonides' Principles, the Fundamentals of Jewish Faith by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. And I'll send you links to those in case you want to look into this. But the principle of resurrection implies that the body is not merely an object, but a subject. I'll explain. The body is part of the person themselves. So in Judaism, we have and take very seriously the obligation to bury to bury a body with honor as quickly as possible. And Judaism forbids cremation, you may be aware of that, and also forbids the use of a corpse for theoretical research, because both cremation and research on corpses treat the body as an object. Judaism doesn't see the body as antithetical to spiritual awareness. It's part of it's like a team. So Rabbi Weinberg says, if the body were the villain, then why would God create a resurrection to drag it back into being? In Judaism, a person is not just a soul, but a body and a soul together. Okay. So what we have just gone through are the 13 principles of faith. And I don't know, you can tell me, let me see. I want to introduce you to this prayer that we call Yigdal. And Yigdal has 13 verses, and each verse is a poetic form of these ideas. And I actually created a chart, which I'm not going to show you, but I can send you to see the same idea expressed in different language. So Yigdal is a prayer, as I said, it's part of the morning service every day. And it basically summarizes or expresses in poetic form these 13 ideas. So the first one, there are multiple translations, but I'll just read you. I'm not going to read you all 13 verses, but here's the first one in translation. Acclaim and praise the living God who exists beyond the boundaries of time. Remember, we spoke about this idea that God created time, past, present, future doesn't exist for God. Most singular of all, concealed and yet also without bound. He has no, excuse me, I have the hiccups. He has no body, nor even the appearance of a body. It is impossible to measure his holiness. Prior to everything that was created, first of all, and yet he himself was without a beginning, and so on and so on. Okay, so I am going to, I see that I missed a whole bunch of chat messages, so we can talk about that. And we have like 5 minutes left or so. So I'd like to hear anything that you have to ask or to say before we finish up for today. Nothing?
Rivka,
Yes.
okay, I just had something that I'm having a hard time kind of understanding, but if perhaps you could bring it to me. Because in Genesis, like it says, we were created in the image of God, man. So if he has no, what is that? I don't know how that means when he doesn't have a face, he doesn't have, I just don't understand why that would be there. So does the rabbis have anything about?
Absolutely. It is a classic question of what does it mean? And I want to give you a respectful answer. So I can't do it off the top of my head, but I'm writing myself a note. What does it mean that God created us in his image if he has no physicality, right? That's basically the question. All right, here's what I'm going to do, Margaret. I'm gonna look into the books, and I will put a like more of an explanation in the chat, because it's not only a very deep question, but it's a question that the rabbis have asked and answered. But I don't want to do it, what we say in Hebrew, al regel echad, on one leg, because I want to give you a more complete answer. Anybody else? Yes, no? Okay. All right. So so there you have it, the 13 principles of faith in Torah. And maybe privately, it would be interesting to me to know, if you want to share with the group, or on the WhatsApp, or if you don't want to say anything now, like how much of this sits comfortably with you because it's in alignment with what you already believe, and how much of it is like really a stretch, or very uncomfortable. As I said, practically speaking, we don't have the like, it's not like a test that Jews have to take, even converts that that don't have to uh, declare in the same way. So I may be misrepresenting, but I believe that in order to be a Christian, there are certain things you have to accept. And I don't know if you have to accept them publicly or um, how that works exactly, but these are understood as the building blocks of what constitutes the belief system of a Torah Jew. So I hope it was eye-opening for you. I'm curious to know if any of them are um, aligned with you, uncomfortable for you, whatever. But that in any case is what I came to say. Last chance, does anybody want to unmute themselves and say anything, ask a question, react? Poor Lori, is it really hot in Texas? Oh, no.
So
Okay. Yeah.
I took a small little class on the 13 principles, which not a small little class, it could be a lot of classes, to be honest. But one of the rabbis said that whenever, because somebody asked the same question, what does it mean to be created in his image if he has no image? Because the rabbi explained that he exists beyond physical, beyond spiritual, like anything, like beyond all of that. He is not either of those things, he's beyond it. And he said that we are imprints and forms. And so I don't, it's still to me, because I can't grasp in my brain, in my little infinite brain, the vastness. I still can't, to me.
You will never be able to.
Right.
You'll never be, because
So,
that's the issue.
whenever you say my father, you think of a person, right? Like when you're praying to God, to Hashem, and you're like my father, or Tati, my king, and so it's just hard to grasp that whole, like, what is he, like that vastness of beyond anything physical or spiritual, that he exists outside of our terms of defining anything. But he said we were imprints. So
I have to
I
say,
have
I don't
no
exactly
relation to
understand what that
question.
means.
Exactly.
But
Like maybe printed in a coin, so
well, I will say that this idea, it sometimes occurs to me that I think, like the rest of you, I try to live my life for God. And I don't even really know what that means. Like I know what it means in terms of how I make my decisions and how the Torah guidelines impact what clothes I wear, what food I eat, what holidays I celebrate, like that. I understand that, but I cannot wrap my finite brain around this concept of an infinite God. And I also understand that that is the nature of what it means to be a created being, that we can't. It doesn't matter. I could spend the rest of my life in isolation in a quiet room contemplating God. I don't have the vessel for it. I don't have the capacity for it. And I'm not saying that like out of humility. We, humanity, can't fully grasp this. So Margaret's question is such a deep question, because how are we can only, it's maybe in the next world, maybe when we are not in a finite limited world, we will be able to have a deeper or a more complete understanding of what it means to have a being that has no form, that's indivisible, that precedes creation, that cannot not exist. But right now we just don't have that capacity. And I think for as many decades as I have been a Torah Jew, I'm not any closer to understanding it, because I can't, it's not like, oh, if I try really, really hard and I study really, really hard for many, many years, I will eventually get it. It's beyond our capacity as humans. And it's very humbling. But it's true for everybody who believes in God. If you think you understand God, truly, then there's something probably you need to work on. Right?
I had a question, Rivka, about the name of that book, The 13 Principles. I found a bunch that I don't know which one you said was the one you looked at.
So what I will send links. I want
Okay.
to send links in the group to these little books
Mhm.
and also to maybe to the Yigdal prayer. Also the 12th principle, you know, the one about waiting for Mashiach that I told you was a song. I want to send you the link to that. So I have a lot of stuff to share with you as follow-up.
I
Okay?
had one thing to
Yeah, go
add
ahead.
about being the physical. Our souls are a spark or a part of God, and so that's a way we're connected and physical with God, you
But
know,
the
through
soul's
the
not a physical thing.
yeah, well, yeah, yeah, right, okay. No,
But
neither
it
is
is right. It is kind of mind-blowing. Like when you really start to contemplate these things, it
Mm.
you really do get to a point where you can't wrap your brain around it because I mean I can no more understand God than I truly, you know, than I can understand quantum physics or whatever. But there are people who understand quantum physics. When I was in graduate school, I had to take 3 semesters of statistics. And the last semester was advanced inferential statistics. And I remember sitting in that, and you know, you should excuse me. I think I'm a reasonably smart person. I'm sitting in that class, and it is like they are speaking another language. But I can plainly see that there are people who understand what the teacher's saying, and they are asking cogent questions that make sense in the context of what he has shared. But it is like another language to me, and I never got it. Okay. But you see that the human brain is capable ultimately, some human brains, of getting it. What is advanced inferential statistics? How does it work? What is quantum physics? How does it work? What is, you know, what we say, like what rocket science and how it works, okay? This no human being can ever really master because it's beyond, it's just beyond our capacity. So there you go. I'm going to leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll see you, God willing, next week, and we will look on the group for all the links of all the things that I said I was going to share with you. Okay. Thank you so much, you guys. Bye bye. Shalom.